security guard's voice came through my phone at 7,014 on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing contracts for a deal that would close before lunch. "Ms. Harlow? There are two people at the front gate. They say they're your parents." I set my coffee down very slowly. "Tell them I'll call them back." I didn't call them back. I sat at my desk and looked out at the city below. 41 floors of glass and steel between me and the street, and I thought about the last time I saw my mother's face. She was standing in the doorway of the house I grew up in, arms crossed, and she said, "You've got 20 minutes to get your things and go." After that, I'm calling the police. I was 22 years old. I had $63 in my checking account, and I hadn't done anything wrong. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Growing up, I understood early that I was not the daughter my mother had planned for. My older sister was the plan. Graceful, obedient, the kind of girl who remembered to say thank you and never left dishes in the sink. She played piano. She got straight A's without being reminded. She married the kind of man my mother approved of, the kind with a firm handshake and a family name people in our town recognized. I was the one who asked too many questions, who got into arguments with teachers and somehow won them, who chose a business degree over nursing because I genuinely wanted to, not because I was trying to spite anyone, though my mother took it that way regardless. "You always have to be difficult," she told me the night before I left for college. She said it the way someone states a fact, not an accusation, like she'd already moved past being hurt by it and arrived somewhere colder. My father never said much. He worked, he watched the news. He deferred to my mother on anything involving the children, the house, or the general emotional temperature of our family. He was not a bad man in any dramatic sense. He was just absent in a way that was worse, sometimes, than active cruelty, because at least cruelty acknowledges you exist. I came home from college the summer after my junior year with a business plan. I know how that sounds. I was 21 and had been working on it since February with a professor who told me in very plain terms that the concept was sound and I should pursue it. It was a logistics software platform, nothing glamorous, but I'd identified a gap in how small regional distributors were managing inventory and routing, and I had a solution. I wanted to ask my mother and father for a small loan, $20,000 to cover initial development costs while I finished my degree. I had a full pitch deck. I had projected returns. I had a letter of intent from a potential early client. I never got to present any of it. My mother had gone through my laptop. She'd found the emails with my professor. She'd found the early financial models, and she had decided, without asking me a single question, that I was planning to drop out, throw away everything they'd sacrificed, and embarrass the family with some harebrained scheme that would fail inside of 6 months. "I didn't raise you to waste your life chasing fantasies," she said. "I'm not dropping out. I'm planning for after graduation. You need to stop thinking you're smarter than everyone else in this room." My father was in the room. He said nothing. My sister happened to be visiting that weekend. After dinner, I pulled her aside and asked if she would talk to our mother, just to smooth things over, just to help her understand I wasn't being reckless. My sister looked at me with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite kitty and wasn't quite contempt, but was some precise mixture of both. "You know how she is," she said. "Why do you always have to push?" I went back to school in September. I graduated the following May with honors. I moved back home for what I told myself would be no more than 3 months while I got the business off the ground and found my own place. I lasted 6 weeks. The specific argument that ended it was about a phone call. I had been on a call with a potential investor, a contact my professor had connected me with, and the call ran long past dinner. My mother had made pot roast. It was on the table getting cold. I came downstairs still on the phone, mouthed "I'm sorry," 5 minutes, and went back to the hallway to finish. By the time I hung up, my mother was standing at the kitchen sink with her back to me, and the kind of silence in the room that had a shape to it. "That was a really important call," I said. "I think he's going to invest. The food is cold. I can heat mine up. I'm sorry." She turned around. Her face was completely calm, which was always the sign that something serious was coming. "I've been thinking," she said, "that this arrangement isn't working. Mom, you're 22 years old. You have a degree. It's time for you to be responsible for yourself." "I'm trying to be. That's literally what I'm doing. I want you out by the end of the week." I looked at my father. He was cutting his pot roast into very small, careful pieces. "Dad." He didn't look up. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of my childhood bed and looked at the walls, still the same pale yellow from when I was 12, and I did the math. $63 in checking. The business account had about $400, which I needed for a server cost due in 2 weeks. No savings to speak of. My 2 closest friends from college had both moved to other cities. I had nowhere to go. I called my aunt, my mother's younger sister, who had always seemed warmer, more reasonable. She let me talk for almost 4 minutes before she said she didn't want to get in the middle of family business. I left on a Thursday morning. My mother stood in the doorway and watched me load my car. She didn't help. She didn't say goodbye. She said very quietly as I was pulling the door shut on the last box, "I hope this teaches you something." I drove to a motel 40 minutes outside of town and paid for 3 nights with my debit card. Then I sat in that motel room and I made a list. It was a very short list. It said, what do I have? What do I need? What can I do today? What I had: a car, a laptop, 1 potential investor who hadn't committed yet, a business plan, and a professor who believed in me. What I needed: a roof for more than 3 days' income and about $18,000. What I could do that day: call the investor back. His name was a man I'll just call Mr. Osei, a retired operations executive who consulted on the side and occasionally put small amounts into early-stage startups that his former colleagues flagged for him. My professor had described him as patient and practical, which turned out to be accurate. I called him from the motel parking lot because the room had bad reception. I told him the truth. I told him I had just left my family's home, I had limited runway, and I needed to know within the next week whether he was in or out, because I had decisions to make either way. There was a pause. "How much runway do you have right now?" he asked. "About 3 days of housing, and then I need to figure something out." Another pause. "Send me the updated deck tonight," he said. "I'll look at it tomorrow morning." He called me back the next afternoon. He was in for $15,000, structured as a convertible note, with a handshake agreement that he'd introduce me to 2 other people in his network if I hit a specific milestone within 6 months. I cried in the parking lot after I hung up. Not pretty crying, the kind where you have to sit on the curb because your legs don't work properly. Then I wiped my face, went back inside, and started looking for a room to rent. The next 2 years were not cinematic. I rented a room in a house shared by 3 other people: a nursing student, a guy who worked nights at a warehouse, and a woman about 10 years older than me who did freelance graphic design and kept extremely odd hours. The house smelled like coffee and someone else's laundry, and it was the first place I had ever lived where no one had any expectations of me at all, and that turned out to be exactly what I needed. I worked on the platform during the day and waitress 3 evenings a week at a restaurant downtown to cover my share of the rent. I was not good at waitressing. I spilled things. I confused orders. I once brought a man a side of coleslaw that he had very clearly not asked for, and he tipped me $4 on a $60 check, which felt about right. But the platform was working. My first paying client came in at month 4, a small produce distributor in Ohio who'd found me through a referral from Mr. Osei's network. They paid $1,100 a month. I remember sitting at the kitchen table in that shared house at 11 o'clock at night, looking at the first payment confirmation and thinking, it's real. It's an actual real thing. By month 8, I had 4 clients and enough revenue that I quit the waitressing job. By month 14, I had hired my first contractor. By the end of year 2, I had 17 clients, 2 full-time employees, and had just signed a partnership agreement with a regional logistics firm that wanted to white label the software. I did not call my parents during any of this. I did not call my sister. My aunt sent me a Christmas card the first year, which I found vaguely insulting, and I did not send one back. My mother, I later found out from a distant cousin who still moved in those circles, had told people in town that I had gone through a mental breakdown and moved away. She did not tell people I had started a company. She told people I had simply fallen apart, which she seemed to feel vindicated her in some way I don't fully understand. My father, as far as I know, continued not saying much. By year 5, the company had grown past the point where I could manage it with the structure we had. We needed real capital, real infrastructure, and a real leadership team. I spent 8 months preparing for a Series A round. I worked with a law firm in the city, built out a proper board, and updated our financial projections with the help of a CFO we'd brought on 6 months earlier. We closed the round at $4.2 million. The day the wire hit our account, I was standing in my office on the 41st floor. We had moved to proper office space about a year earlier, and I looked out at the city and thought about the motel parking lot, about sitting on the curb, about $63 in a convertible note and a shared house that smelled like other people's laundry. I thought about my mother standing in that doorway. I hope this teaches you something. It did, actually. Just not what she meant. The call from the front gate came on a Tuesday in October, 6 years and 4 months after I drove away from that house. I told the security guard to tell them I would call back. Then I sat very still for about 10 minutes and thought carefully about what I wanted to do. I did not want a dramatic confrontation. I'd imagined one in the early years, had mentally rehearsed various versions of it the way you do when you're angry and young and running on not enough sleep. But I was 30 now and I had built something real, and dramatic confrontations require you to care very much, and I had done a lot of work to get to a place where I cared the right amount and not more. I called down to the front desk and said to send them up. They looked older. My mother was wearing a coat I didn't recognize and her hair was different. My father looked like he had shrunk slightly, which sometimes happens to people and is not poetic, just biological. They stood in my office doorway and looked around the room. The view, the desk, the framed partnership agreements on the wall, and neither of them said anything for a moment. My mother spoke first. "You've done well for yourself," she said. It was not an apology, it was not even close to one. It was the opening move in a conversation she had decided she wanted to have, and she was choosing to begin it with a compliment because she thought that was the currency that would get her what she wanted. "What can I do for you?" I said. I kept my voice completely even. She sat down without being invited to in the chair across from my desk. My father remained standing near the door. She explained in organized and fairly unemotional terms that things had changed. My father had retired 18 months earlier. The retirement savings were not what they had planned on. There had been some bad advice, some poor decisions, a financial advisor who had not been adequately vetted. My sister and her husband had their own situation, and they had been wondering whether I might be in a position to help. I let her finish. Then I said, "I appreciate you being straightforward with me about this." She looked at me with the beginning of relief in her eyes, which was when I continued. "I want to be straightforward back. When I left this family, I had $63 and nowhere to go. I asked my aunt for help and she didn't want to get involved. I asked you to believe in something I had worked very hard on, and you told me to leave. I built everything in this room, everything, without any support from you. Not financial, not emotional, nothing." My mother opened her mouth. "I'm not finished," I said gently. "I'm not saying this to be cruel. I'm saying it because I think honesty is the only thing that makes this conversation worth having." I paused. "I'm not going to give you money. I don't think that would be good for either of us." The relief had left her eyes. My father was looking at the floor. "What I will do," I said, "is help you find a fee-only financial advisor, someone reputable who I can personally vet. And I'll pay for 3 sessions with them so you can understand your actual situation and make a real plan. That's something I can do for you because it's useful and not because I owe it." My mother sat very still. "You don't owe us anything?" she said. Her voice had gone quiet in a way I remembered. "You chose to become parents," I said. "I didn't choose to be born. You were responsible for me until I was an adult. After that, no. I don't owe you anything. And I think somewhere, if you're honest with yourself, you know that." She stood up. She picked up her purse. She looked around the room one more time, and I watched her take it in. Really take it in. And I couldn't tell exactly what she felt, because I have never fully been able to read my mother. That was always the problem between us. At the door, she stopped. "I hope you're not lonely up here," she said. "I'm not," I said. "But I hope you'll think about the financial advisor. It's a real offer. It doesn't expire." She left. My father followed her without speaking. The elevator doors opened and closed. I went back to my desk and picked up my coffee, which had gone completely cold, and I sat there for a while just looking at the city. I wasn't happy in the way I had imagined I would be in those early years, when revenge had felt like something I was working toward. I was something quieter than that. Something more like settled. I had built a life that was entirely mine, every brick of it, and no one had given it to me, and no one had given it to me, and no one could take it away. And that, as it turned out, was enough. It was actually more than enough. It was everything. I did send the financial advisor referral, by the way, 3 days later, by email. Professional, brief, no commentary. My mother never responded. But the advisor's office called me 2 weeks later to confirm they'd booked the first appointment. I smiled when I saw that notification. It was a small smile, private, the kind you don't explain to anyone. Then I went back to work. I've thought a lot about what my mother expected to happen when she stood in that doorway. I think she expected me to struggle for a while, come back humbled, and slot myself into a version of life she found easier to understand. A version where I was smaller, quieter, less convinced that the thing I had built in my head was worth building in the real world. I think she believed that difficulty would correct me the way it had failed to do when I was a teenager asking too many questions in class. What she didn't account for was that difficulty had never actually stopped me from doing anything. It had just made me slower and more careful and more precise about what I spent energy on. And when you strip away the approval of everyone around you, when you are sitting alone in a motel room with $63 and 3 days of housing, you find out very quickly what you actually believe. Not what you've been told to believe. Not what we've been told to believe. Not what would make someone else comfortable. What you believe, in the quiet, when no one is watching. I believed the platform was good. I believed Mr. Osei was right to take the chance. And I believed, maybe more than anything, that I had done nothing wrong. That conviction, not bitterness, not a need to prove something to my mother, is what carried me through the 2 years of waitressing in shared houses and server costs I could barely cover. Bitterness is expensive fuel. It burns hot and then it burns out. What lasts is something quieter, something more like clarity. There's a version of this story where I became someone defined by what was done to me. I've met people who live that way, and I understand it. The injury is real, the betrayal is real, and nobody should have to build a life from $63 because their own mother decided they weren't worth patience. That's real, and I won't pretend otherwise, but I made a choice, somewhere in that first year, that I was not going to let the worst thing that happened to me become the most important thing about me. The actions my mother took had consequences she did not plan for. She removed me from a situation where her judgment was limiting what I could do, and in doing so she gave me the one thing I actually needed, complete freedom to fail or succeed entirely on my own terms. She thought she was punishing me. She was, without knowing it, clearing the runway. And my aunt, who didn't want to get involved, her distance taught me something too. It taught me that neutrality in the face of someone else's harm is its own kind of choice, and it carries its own weight. You don't have to be cruel to cause damage. You just have to be absent at the right moment. What I want anyone to take from this is not that things work out in the end. Sometimes they don't. What I want you to take is this: the clearest, most useful thing you can do when everyone around you stops believing in you is to get very serious about your own judgment. Not arrogant. Not reckless. Serious. Do the work. Check your assumptions. Listen to the people who have earned the right to give you feedback. And then trust what you know, even when knowing it is lonely. Intelligence without integrity collapses under pressure. Integrity without resilience breaks the first time something goes wrong. But when you build both, when you do the honest thing even when it costs you, and you stay with the hard thing even when it's exhausting, you end up with something that belongs to you in a way that nothing given to you ever could. I set my coffee down when that security call came in, and I knew exactly who I was when I did it.